This night, the shadows were coming for the spotlight. The grand meridian glittered like a jewel dropped in the heart of the city. A string quartet stitched silver notes through the air. Cameras pulsed like patient lightning. Near the stage, a ring of donors, influencers, and power brokers leaned forward as the MC lifted a satin sash and a diamond crown. Adrian Kane was already smiling for the headline he could practically taste. "Our queen," he murmured loud enough for 3 microphones to catch. Chin high, shoulders set, lashes lowered just enough to suggest humility. The title mattered because perception mattered, and Adrian understood perception like most people understand oxygen. He raised her hand and kissed the knuckles, his eyes scanning the room to confirm every rival saw him claim his prize. Record donations, he boasted to a hedge fund chair. Everything tonight, down to the last orchid centerpiece, pleased Adrian. "Adrian, how big was your pledge? What's next for the queen of the city?" It could have been a line from last month. After party at Caraval, someone asked. The MC, savoring a final beat, lifted the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for your queen." First a pause, then a ripple, then a hush you could almost see. Heads turned the way flowers turned toward the sun. The first was a woman in a fitted black gown with a clean architectural line, her hair swept into a low knot, her posture unflinching. Victor Lang. Lang. A donor who'd never been starstruck in his life reached instinctively for his tie. Adrian's smile broke. Not cracked, broke. He recognized the woman instantly, though he hadn't seen her in months. The person he had dismissed as too quiet for this world, as if quiet were a flaw you could fix with money. She had left with a suitcase and a silence that frightened him more than any shouting ever could. He hadn't expected her to disappear so completely. He definitely hadn't expected her to return like this, luminous and visibly pregnant, escorted by the hardest-to-reach man in the city. "Who is that?" she hissed, her smile still pinned in place for the press. Adrian didn't answer. His jaw worked, then set. Cameras swiveled, recalibrating like hunting dogs catching a new scent. Elena didn't rush. The room adjusted to her pace the way a ship adjusts to a new current. The crown on Giselle's head glinted like a dare. Elena's hand rested on her belly like a vow. Victor's expression didn't change. What changed was the posture of the people nearest them. No one escorts Elena anywhere without her consent. He adjusted his tuxedo as if the fit had suddenly betrayed him. Smile. Stay with the step and repeat. We control the narrative. But the publicist had never met a narrative like the one walking calmly down the center aisle. People began to stand, not in ovation exactly, but in that involuntary way crowds rise when an arrival truly matters. The foundation's largest donors had already read the confidential giving ledger. Some of them had already seen a name they'd never expected to see attached to a number that broke all previous records. They didn't know if they were supposed to clap. They didn't know if they were allowed to breathe. The quartet, not knowing what else to do, kept playing. Adrian hopped off the riser, cutting across cable lines toward her. "What are you doing?" he said, choosing a smile he'd used on investors he was about to undercut. Up close, Elena looked different. Not harder, exactly. Truer. "Enjoying the gala," she said. "Congratulations." It wasn't remorse. It was recognition of a battle he didn't even know he was losing. Victor stepped a half pace forward, which felt like a door closing softly. It was a statement of fact in the tone of a ledger. Adrian's throat tightened. He had tried more than once to get coffee with this man and been told kindly that calendars were unkind. He had never been in shouting distance of Lang without a mediator. Now Lang was here with Elena, saying his name in a room where every ear was tuned to power. Nervous laughter skittered through the room, then stopped when the foundation director approached the mic. She looked toward Elena as if seeking permission. Victor didn't blink. For now, thank you. The pins bit into her scalp. She looked at Adrian like he owed her a new reality. Tell me, she whispered through her smile, that this is a coincidence. It's fine, he said, because fine was a word he could say without meaning. This is just noise. A reporter reached Elena first. Miss Kane, are you here to support the Queen of the city? I'm here to support the city, she said, and the children who live in it. The Crown looked at her. Then, sure. Victor offered Elena his hand again, and she took it. Together, they turned slightly toward the foundation director, toward the stage, toward whatever the night was about to become. The quartet drifted into a brighter key. In the glass doors, the city's lights shifted like a living thing. Elena's steps were measured, unafraid. She didn't look back. She didn't apologize for arriving late to a story that used to belong to someone else. Victor faced forward, impassive, a mountain wearing a tuxedo. 100 small lenses inhaled together. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, what a development. And just like that, the night everyone thought belonged to Adrian Kane bent around a different center of gravity. The crown still glittered. The money still mattered. Photographers clung to the edges of the moment so they could sell it to the morning. The hedge fund chair checked his phone and texted his wife 3 words. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks again and found his hands unsteady. But every story has another side, and this one began not in the spotlight, but in the quiet heartbreak of a promise betrayed. Her name was Amelia Hart, and to the outside world, she was invisible. She was working the night shift as a receptionist at a boutique hotel where Daniel had checked in one rainy Tuesday, wearing a tailored navy suit and the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. He had noticed her instantly. He promised a life she had only seen in magazines. Daniel's business in high-end event management kept him busy, but he was charming in public and attentive enough in private to make her feel like she mattered. She didn't complain when he traveled for weeks. Amelia became, in Daniel's words, a partner who knew her place. The night she told him, she had planned every detail. His favorite dinner, a small wrapped box containing the ultrasound picture, and a note that read, "We're going to be 3. From that day on, Amelia noticed the shift. Calls came later at night, trips lasted longer, and then came the rumors. Amelia didn't confront him. Her days became an endless loop of prenatal appointments, grocery lists, and quiet evenings in a house that felt too big, too cold. She would fall asleep to the faint hum of the fridge and wake to an empty bed, wondering which lie he had told her before slipping out. The only warmth in her life came from the tiny life growing inside her. Each kick was a reminder that she was still needed, still capable of creating something pure in a world that had become so painfully artificial. She would place her hand on her belly and whisper promises about safety, about love, about never letting this child feel the kind of abandonment she felt every time Daniel chose someone else over her. Amelia had grown up in foster care, passed from home to home until she was 16. She had vowed long ago that when she had a family, it would be different. By the time Daniel's affair was an open secret, Amelia was in her 3rd trimester. The fatigue was heavy, but so was the quiet resolve building inside her. And when she finally saw a tabloid photo of him and Elena at a charity gala, his hand low on her back, both of them smiling like a couple who had nothing to hide, Amelia realized she wasn't invisible anymore. She was irrelevant. But irrelevance has a strange way of becoming fuel. She began making quiet preparations. That friend would later become the man who stood beside her when she made her entrance at the gala. On the surface, Amelia played her part flawlessly. She was storing it all away for the moment she knew would come. That moment came sooner than she expected. Naturally, "I'm bringing Elena." He didn't look up. And just like that, the man she had once thought would protect her had erased her from his biggest night, replacing her with the woman who had been chipping away at their marriage for months. Amelia didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, letting him think he had won. But inside, something clicked into place. A quiet, steel-edged certainty that she wasn't just going to be erased. She was going to walk back into his perfect evening and burn the memory of her into every mind in that room. And when she did, she wouldn't be alone. The Crown and Charity Gala was more than just a social event. And that was before you factored in the silent auction items. Held at the historic Langford Grand Hotel, the ballroom was a cathedral of opulence. Each table was dressed in midnight blue silk linens with place cards scripted in gold ink. Even the champagne flutes bore the gala's crest, a gold crown etched into crystal. The early hour belonged to the red carpet, flashbulbs popping as women in couture gowns stepped out of town cars, diamonds catching the camera's hunger. And the late hour, that belonged to the crowning of the Queen of the City. A tradition born decades ago as a way to honor the woman who raised the most money for the gala's chosen charity. It was equal parts competition, performance, and political maneuvering. The same Elena Daniel had replaced Amelia with. Elena had charmed the judges, the press, and most importantly, the board of donors. Daniel arrived early that night with Elena on his arm, radiating the smug energy of a man certain he was about to be photographed into history. Elena wore a champagne-colored gown dripping in sequins. Every move Daniel made that night was calculated. Cameras followed them, eating up the narrative. The dazzling newcomer, the ambitious partner, the unbeatable campaign. Her plan had been in motion for weeks. Victor was the kind of power you didn't see on stage. He was the one deciding who got to be there in the first place. She didn't ask for a favor. She presented him with an opportunity. Her proposal was simple, a substantial donation from her own startup's charitable arm, directed entirely toward the Children's Promise Foundation in partnership with the Lang Foundation. The amount was enough to shift the night's record-breaking tally. It also came with one condition. Victor didn't hesitate. "I like a good story," he said over the phone, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that could both unsettle and reassure. "And I think this one will be memorable." In a suite upstairs, a stylist adjusted the train of her midnight black gown, a piece custom-made for her by a designer she had once illustrated children's books with, back when her life was simpler. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, and the only jewelry she wore was a pair of sapphire drop earrings. The deep blue caught the light like secrets catching air. The timing of her arrival was deliberate. Too early, and she would be just another guest drifting in with the crowd. Then, just as the MC was preparing to announce the top donors of the evening, the grand ballroom doors opened. The sight of Victor Lang, rarely seen in public, walking in with a pregnant woman on his arm, was enough to pull eyes from every corner. Conversations faltered. Photographers pivoted like soldiers following a new command. And as the pair moved forward, the energy in the room shifted. The floral scent, the hum of conversation, the faint notes of the string quartet, all of it seemed to dim against the sudden spotlight that followed them. From his place near the stage, Daniel froze. Not in the plain clothes of the wife he had left behind, but in a gown that belonged on a magazine cover, carrying herself with the kind of calm that only came from knowing you had the upper hand. His hand tightened on Elena's waist, but his smile slipped just enough for the cameras to catch it. Victor's presence was the final twist of the knife. And now here was Victor, escorting Daniel's ex-wife into the most important night of his year. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it's my honor to introduce one of tonight's most generous contributors, Mr. Victor Lang, and his guest, Miss Amelia Hart." The applause was immediate, but it wasn't just polite. It was curious, charged, alive. Daniel Cross had built his career on charm, timing, and a dangerous talent for making people believe he was indispensable. He was quick with a smile, quicker with a flattering word, and never lingered long enough for anyone to notice he'd given them nothing of substance. When they first married, his ambition had been exciting. She admired how he could envision opportunities where others saw obstacles. He needed to be seen succeeding, to be applauded for every victory, no matter how small. And when Amelia's pregnancy made her less available to play the part of the polished partner, he began looking elsewhere for that applause. It was a calculated move. The rising star in the city's high society partnered with a woman who turned heads. The first time Amelia suspected something, it was subtle. Daniel came home from a networking dinner smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't own. Once, she found a hotel key card in the pocket of his tuxedo pants, one he claimed belonged to a client too drunk to remember his own room number. By then, Amelia had stopped asking. She didn't need the truth from his mouth. She could read it in the way he avoided her eyes. Daniel's arrogance peaked the day he told her she wouldn't be attending the Crown and Charity Gala. He delivered the news casually, almost dismissively, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "Elena's better suited for this kind of event," he said over his coffee. But Amelia felt the cut deep. In his mind, Amelia was predictable. That was part of why he'd married her in the first place. Daniel talked openly about her chances of winning the crown, framing it as a victory for them both. "It's about raising money for a great cause, but of course, recognition never hurts." Amelia was out of the picture, and Elena was about to be crowned in front of the city's most influential audience. He would be on stage beside her, soaking in the applause, shaking hands with donors, and securing partnerships for his next big venture. The crown wasn't just a symbol for Elena. In his arrogance, Daniel had underestimated her network. He certainly didn't imagine she would choose the night of his triumph to appear, pregnant, radiant, and escorted by the one man in the room whose approval could eclipse his. At the gala, Daniel's confidence radiated like heat. "You'll be seeing her on stage soon," he told them, his grin a masterclass in self-assurance. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the air until the applause for a different entrance started to ripple through the room. When the ballroom doors opened to reveal Victor and Amelia, Daniel's first reaction wasn't shock, it was irritation. Who had invited her, and why was she with him? For the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar in her presence. Intimidation. She wasn't here to beg, cry, or cause a scene. She was here to be seen. And she was succeeding. Maybe this wouldn't matter by the time the crown was placed on Elena's head. But when the MC announced Amelia as one of the night's most generous contributors, standing alongside Victor Lang, those maybes turned to ash. Daniel clapped mechanically, forcing his expression into something polite. He needed to regain control of the narrative. He needed the cameras to return to him. The guests who had been circling him moments earlier were now angling for introductions to Amelia. Daniel's arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that Amelia could ever stand on equal ground with him. Now she was standing taller. What stung most wasn't the loss of attention. It was the realization that he had done this to himself. By underestimating her, by pushing her out, by thinking she was better suited to stay home, he had given her the perfect stage for her return, and she had taken it without a single word of warning. As the night moved toward the crowning, Daniel tried to focus on the plan he'd built for months, but the cracks were there, widening with every glance in Amelia's direction. He smiled for the cameras, but behind the mask, the truth was setting in. The man who prided himself on controlling every outcome had just lost the one that mattered most. The ballroom was designed for spectacle, but it wasn't supposed to belong to her. From the moment Amelia stepped inside on Victor Lang's arm, the oxygen in the room seemed to shift. The applause that greeted them wasn't the polite, obligatory kind Daniel had orchestrated for Elena. People rose slightly from their chairs, leaning to get a better look. Now that light was gone, swallowed by the gravitational pull of a woman he had dismissed as irrelevant. Elena's nails dug into his arm through the sequined fabric of her gown. But the lie tasted like metal. Each step toward the front of the room was deliberate, her posture regal, her chin slightly lifted. She glanced around as though taking in the decor, the guests, the night itself, never once acknowledging Daniel directly. And she did. It was the kind of moment money couldn't buy. Authentic, disarming, unforgettable. He led Elena toward a group of influential donors, hoping to redirect attention. But even as they shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, he could feel it, their eyes flicking over his shoulder, tracking Amelia's movements. Conversations cut short as people excused themselves to say hello to Victor. The same donors Daniel had been courting for weeks were now beelining toward his ex-wife. When the MC returned to the microphone to announce the evening's top donors, the room braced for the expected. This time, there was a twist. In third place, he announced, the Crown and Charity Committee thanks Mr. and Mrs. David Renner. Polite applause. Daniel's smile froze. And in first place, the MC continued, setting a new record for a single donation in gala history. Cameras flashed like a storm. Even those who didn't know Amelia felt compelled to applaud. Amelia spoke briefly, thanking the foundation and the guests for their generosity. When she handed the microphone back, Victor leaned toward the MC and said something quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said. "It's my understanding that Miss Hart's contribution this evening was inspired by a commitment to community that predates this gala. And tonight, her vision will be fully funded." It wasn't just a win. The applause went on long enough that Daniel stopped clapping before it ended. Every cheer felt like a nail sealing the coffin on the image he had built for himself and Elena. As the MC prepared to announce the Queen of the City, the audience was still buzzing from Amelia's appearance. The crown glittered, but it felt like costume jewelry compared to the weight of what Amelia had already claimed. When the photo call began, Daniel noticed the cruel efficiency of the press. They took the required shots of Elena in her crown, then pivoted to capture Amelia and Victor in conversation with the city's most influential figures. By the time dessert was served, it was clear which images would dominate the next morning's coverage. Elena tried to mask her frustration, but Daniel could feel it radiating off her. There was nothing to say. It was the look of someone who knew she'd already won the only battle worth fighting. Not that she had stolen his spotlight, but that she had never needed it in the first place. Before Amelia Hart walked into the Crown and Charity Gala with the poise of someone who belonged there, she had fallen so far she wondered if she'd ever stand again. The morning Daniel told her she wouldn't be attending, she held herself together just long enough for him to leave the house. She smiled faintly, nodded, even kissed his cheek. Her knees buckled. For a long time, she didn't cry, just sat there, staring at the grain of the wood cabinets. The baby moved, a gentle flutter, and she pressed a trembling hand to her belly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. She wasn't. Not even close. That afternoon, she walked through the house like a ghost. The dining room, where they'd once shared long dinners, now looked like a showroom for strangers. She paused at the vanity, catching sight of herself in the mirror. Her hair was unkempt, her skin pale. The first tears came then, hot and unstoppable. She thought of the woman Daniel had chosen instead. Amelia imagined her at fittings for designer gowns, laughing in Daniel's ear while he adjusted his cuff links. The comparison was a blade she kept twisting on herself. Days blurred. Meals went untouched. Her prenatal vitamins sat in a row on the counter like quiet witnesses to her unraveling. She told herself she was just tired, that it was normal to feel off during pregnancy, but deep down she knew this was something heavier. She padded to the living room and sat on the couch, pulling one of Daniel's discarded sweaters around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of his cologne. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting second, she wished she could go back, before the lies, before the distance, before she knew what he was capable of. But the moment passed, and when it did, something else took its place. She turned the thought over like a coin, testing its weight. It wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. Not for her own sake, and not for the child who would soon depend on her completely. She showered, dried her hair, and put on clean clothes, even if no one would see her. James listened without judgment. She laughed bitterly. "It's invitation only." "Then get invited," he said simply. James had done consulting work for the Lang Foundation and knew Victor respected people who acted with purpose, not pretense. That's his cause. It took her 3 days to write the email. This wasn't about them. They met at a quiet corner table in a downtown cafe. He was everything his reputation promised, measured, precise, but with a sharp intelligence that made you feel seen. She answered honestly, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "I like a good story," he said. "And you've got one." "No," she said, meeting his gaze. "It's about building something that lasts." The depression hadn't vanished. It still lingered at the edges, but it no longer defined her. She had an ally. And for the first time, she was thinking beyond Daniel's shadow. In the weeks that followed, she prepared quietly. She met with her stylist friend to design a gown that was elegant without begging for attention. Every step was intentional, calculated not for revenge, but for self-respect. A doctor's appointment where she sat alone in the waiting room surrounded by couples. But each time, she reminded herself the woman in that dream didn't exist anymore. She was becoming someone else. The night before the gala, she stood in front of her mirror, the gown hanging nearby, the sapphire earrings on the dresser. "We're walking in there tomorrow, and we're not hiding." The next evening, when she stepped out of the car onto the Langford Grand's red carpet, cameras flashing, Victor at her side, she felt the weight of the journey she'd taken. The collapse had been real, painful, messy, nearly impossible to climb out of, but it had also been the foundation for something stronger. She was walking back into herself. The musicians had found their rhythm, and the city's elite were leaning into their conversations with the ease of people who believed they were untouchable. Daniel, however, was anything but at ease. But Amelia wasn't there for confrontation. Guests approached in small waves, donors, board members, even 2 city officials, each eager to thank her for her contribution. The opportunity came when the foundation director tapped a crystal glass for attention. A ripple of curiosity swept through the crowd. Victor Lang rarely spoke publicly, and when he did, it was for something significant. "I've been fortunate to partner with many individuals who share that vision. This year, one of those individuals has not only contributed financially but has committed to a 5-year plan to expand the reach of the Children's Promise Foundation far beyond this city's borders." He paused, letting the words sink in. "That partner," Victor continued, "is standing right here, Miss Amelia Hart." She took the microphone from Victor, feeling the eyes of the entire room, and Daniel's most of all, on her. "Not because I didn't care about the cause, but because life has a way of making you feel small when you've been told you don't belong somewhere. But the truth is, belonging isn't given." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. The applause grew louder, but Amelia wasn't finished. "This isn't about a crown," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about making sure that when these children grow up, they know they are valued, seen, and capable of changing their own worlds." It was subtle, but Daniel felt the hit. She'd used his language, valued, seen, but not for him, not for the image he'd built. She'd taken it and made it something real. "My family, not my child, my family." It was intentional, and it was aimed straight at him. Whispers began to weave through the crowd. Victor, unbothered by the speculation, concluded the announcement and invited everyone to join in the final round of bidding. "Same as you. You're making people think." Her calmness infuriated him. He wanted her rattled, defensive, apologizing. Across the room, Elena was watching, her jaw tight. Every smile she gave now felt forced, every congratulation hollow. Back near the stage, Victor leaned toward Amelia. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "Truth," Victor said with a faint smile, "is the most effective strategy, especially when people expect you to stay silent." As the gala wound toward its close, the whispers only grew. Others guessed that she had been brought in as a deliberate counterweight to Daniel and Elena's rise. Every handshake came with a question disguised as a compliment. Every smile felt like it was masking curiosity about Amelia, not interest in Elena. He could feel his control slipping with every passing minute. It was the unexpected return of a woman everyone had underestimated, and the partnership she had formed with the one man in the room Daniel couldn't compete with. "Congratulations," she said to Elena, her tone polite but cool. "Thank you. I'll see you around," she said, and there was no threat in her voice, just inevitability. Daniel nodded stiffly, but inside he knew this wasn't over. It was her opening move. 2 weeks after the gala, Amelia Hart was no longer the woman Daniel thought he could erase. The morning after that night, her name and photograph were everywhere, splashed across society pages, business columns, and charity newsletters. Who is Amelia Hart, and why did Victor Lang bring her? Others focused on her initiative, praising the Hart-Lang partnership as the most ambitious children's program the city had ever seen. She embraced it. She declined gossip interviews, redirecting every conversation back to the Hart-Lang initiative. She understood that her presence at the gala had been dramatic, but sustaining influence required more than one night. She furnished it with pieces she loved, an oversized reading chair, art from local painters, and a kitchen stocked with the tools she actually used. The nursery, painted in soft shades of gray and cream, overlooked the skyline. She wanted her child's first view of the world to be expansive. Her wardrobe shifted from practical but forgettable to refined. Tailored dresses, silk blouses, and statement coats that turned heads without screaming for attention. In her place was someone who understood her own value, who could walk into a room of power brokers and hold her ground. She made lists, set goals, and refused to let fear dictate her choices. In their weekly meetings about the initiative, she was sharper, more assertive. She challenged ideas, proposed partnerships, and navigated delicate negotiations with a finesse that made even seasoned board members take note. Within a month, she was invited to join the advisory board for another major children's charity. Her face appeared in a profile piece for a national magazine about women leading change. He had expected the gala to be a one-time disruption, a dramatic but fleeting appearance. Donors he'd been courting were now contributing to her initiative. Even Elena had begun to sense the shift, her public smile tightening every time Amelia's name came up in conversation. But Amelia wasn't playing a game to undermine them. She was building something that had nothing to do with them at all. The biggest step in her transformation came when she agreed to give a keynote speech at the city's annual Women in Leadership Summit. Sometimes, she told the packed auditorium, we are pushed out of spaces we thought we belonged in. The standing ovation was immediate. She had become, without trying, a symbol for taking back control after being discarded. Tea, a few minutes of journaling, and a review of her plans for the day. Her confidence didn't mean she was immune to vulnerability. There were still nights when she lay awake, memories of her marriage flickering like an old film reel. But now, she didn't dwell there. She acknowledged the pain, then turned her focus back to the present. She reminded herself that the woman in those memories had survived, and the woman she was now was thriving. By the time winter's first snow dusted the city, Amelia was unrecognizable from the person who had once crumpled on the kitchen floor. Her calendar was full, her initiative was ahead of schedule, and her phone was constantly buzzing with new opportunities. Crowns tarnish, influence fades. What lasts is the life you build when you stop asking to be included and start deciding where you belong. The annual City Leaders Forum wasn't a glamorous event like the Crown and Charity Gala, but it was arguably more important. It was where the real power players gathered, not just to be seen, but to make decisions that shaped the city's future. Victor Lang, the chair of the City Development Council, and Daniel Cross. What Daniel didn't know, what no one outside a select few knew, was that a fourth speaker had been quietly added to the program just 3 days earlier. Her name appeared at the very end of the agenda, Amelia Hart, founder, Hart-Lang Initiative. The perfect public setting to dismantle the image Daniel had been crafting for years. Victor met her in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "I've been ready since the gala," she replied. Inside the main hall, Daniel was already holding court near the stage, shaking hands with council members, smiling for photos. When Daniel spotted Amelia walking in with Victor, his smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. Amelia remained quiet, listening, taking notes. His eyes flickered toward Amelia before he stepped back from the podium. The moderator smiled. "And now we'll hear from Miss Amelia Hart." She rose, her heels clicking softly against the stage floor. She didn't bring slides. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "We've talked today about partnerships and change, but change doesn't come from image." She paused, letting the room settle. "We found that some projects looked impressive on paper but delivered very little to the communities they were meant to serve. Because the focus was on branding, not outcomes." Pens hovered over notepads. "Transparency," she continued, "means showing not just where the money comes from, but where it goes. I believe that every donor, every sponsor, and every beneficiary deserves to see the results." Program X, launched last year with significant corporate backing, claimed to provide 500 scholarship opportunities. Public reports celebrated the launch, but our review found that fewer than 50 students ever received support, and most of those grants were partial. The rest of the funds were absorbed by administrative costs, event expenses, and marketing. There was a murmur across the audience. They also knew whose company had sponsored it. 85% of every dollar goes directly to services and recipients. We publish quarterly reports for our donors and invite independent auditors to verify our outcomes, because if you're serious about change, you welcome scrutiny. Children don't need crowns, they need results. Even members of the press seated in the back were clapping. The moderator thanked her, but the buzz in the room didn't die down. Daniel stood off to the side, his jaw tight as conversation swirled around her instead of him. Elena, sensing the tension, touched his arm. Amelia left the stage without looking back. She knew what she'd done. "I just let the tide in." Not because Daniel had been embarrassed, though he had, but because she had shifted the conversation. She had taken the space he tried to claim for himself and filled it with something better, something lasting. 2 years later, a different kind of sunlight spilled across the city. It streamed through the large glass windows of the brand new Heartland Children's Center, illuminating a room filled with laughter, colorful artwork, and the boundless energy of kids. The quiet exhaustion was gone, replaced by a radiant peace. Victor was at the podium, speaking to a crowd of donors, city officials, and families. Leo clapped his little hands together, giggling. Amelia scooped him into her arms, kissing his head as she walked to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice clear and strong. "When I started this journey, I was looking for a way to reclaim my story. But I quickly realized it wasn't about my story at all. It was about theirs." She looked out at the children playing, their faces full of hope. He was alone. He looked different, the sharp edges of his ambition softened by something that looked like humility. He wasn't trying to be seen. He was just watching. Their eyes met for a brief second across the distance. Hers was just getting better. "You did it, Amelia," he said softly. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling at him. "And this is only the beginning." Leo slid down a small slide, running back to her with outstretched arms. She hugged him tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood. The crown was forgotten, the betrayal was a healed scar, and the revenge was a life lived beautifully, fully, and on her own terms. She was not a queen of the city. And it was a masterpiece. So, the story has reached its beautiful conclusion, my wonderful friends. Are you still here with me? If you are, it means Amelia's journey from heartbreak to victory has resonated deep within your own heart. No matter what life takes, you have the power to rise, rebuild, and shine brighter than ever before. Your journey matters.